Welcome to the newest episode of Saved by the Books, where two ladies with opposite reading tastes discuss all things reading.
Hey guys, what's up? And welcome to another episode of Saved by the Books. Paige and Becky are back to chat books and hang out with you guys. And this week we're talking about one of our favorite topics, which is romance.
I know, so exciting.
Yes, because both of us love to read some romance. That's probably where we converge on our...
Right? I'm like, I love a good happily ever after with a little angst.
Yep.
Where I'm like, oh my gosh, no, like, you have to get back together.
Yes. But basically, I wanted to talk about romance as a genre because I feel like a lot of people look down on romance and they don't really think it's the same as like
sci-fi.
Yeah, or fantasy or
a contemporary even, or just
like a literary fiction. I feel like those get a lot of hype, which is what we talked about last week. So definitely go listen to that episode. But yeah, I feel like people, I don't know.
I actually saw in a group, it was Sarah McLean's Facebook group this morning. A member mentioned how she was reading, it was some romance book, and she told either her brother or significant other, you know, to give it a try. And they're like, no, this is awful. It's not even a real thing. It's like not a real thing. But if Hollywood got a hold of it, it would be a great Oscar winner.
It would be a great movie.
Right, and I'm like, everyone in there was talking about, that doesn't make sense. Like, if it could be an Oscar-worthy movie, why couldn't it be a good book? Like, why can't we classify it as that? So, because I know... and just a funny story, I told Paige about this, but earlier this week, when I was getting ready, like we had in-service at school, all of this, and I was the one chosen to go drive everyone to lunch. And I happened to be listening to Roar by Cora Carmack in my car, and my Bluetooth was still connected. And so they got in the car, and these are two like good friends, but it came up, and they were like, I was trying to get it off like as quickly as possible, and they just looked at me. They're like, oh, it's that type of book. I was like, no, it's just like, it's a YA. Like it's in the middle of the story. It's like, and they're like, ooh, what's YA? You know, what? And I'm like,
and
I was like, wait, but YA is young adult. Like I said, I promise there is nothing risque like in this. I'm like, oh, sure. And I'm like, I promise you, I said, I would let my students read this book. Like this is...
Well, and YA is another genre that people look down on. Like, if you're an adult reading YA, a lot of people don't think we should, or like...
And I never would have picked up more YA, because I'm reading more and more now. If it wasn't, I think, for the book club, we, where we do read a lot of it, and if it actually wasn't for my students, because I want to read some of the books that they're reading, so I can kind of talk, just like I've watched some of the same movies. Some I'm like, y'all, you shouldn't be reading, watching that. But like,
yeah, I think for me, it's like YA is not really a guilty pleasure, because I don't feel guilty about it, but it's like, I don't want to pick up like the Iliad, or I don't even know. Like, I'm trying to think of some like classic.
Well, or I mean, even like Where the Crawdads Sing is like a harder... hitting book, instead of, sometimes you want that nice easy read where you don't have to think about anything. I feel like the world isn't too difficult to understand. Like, I mean, Game of Thrones, like when you read that, there's a lot going on.
And then, but those same people who read Game of Thrones don't want to read Lord of the Rings.
That's me.
And I'm just like, well, I don't know, like, I feel like every book doesn't need to be a masterpiece.
Right.
To be worthy of being literature, or to be worthy of being fiction. And unfortunately, romance is one that a bunch of people will look down on, because, you have the stereotypical, like, guy on the cover with his abs hanging out. Like, I don't want to read that cover in public.
No, exactly. Like, I know people, a lot of the times that they read those books, it's honestly on a Kindle, or they have, that cover for the book, or, where those fabric covers, like Bible covers, they'll grab those to put around the book because they don't want to read it. Like, I mean, I'm kind of the same way. Like if I'm on a plane or traveling, I wouldn't, so I will actually use my Kindle. Now, if I'm at the beach with some of my friends, I'm like, I don't care because they read the same books that I do. So, but like even at Starbucks, I probably won't pull out one of those necessarily.
Like mass market with the ads on the cover, yeah.
No, I don't even know if I own a book with a guy that's like that on the cover. And I do actually read quite a bit of romance.
Well, I don't know if I do, it's from BookCon, because we got those few romance books.
Yes,
and so like those would be the only ones.
Yeah, I may have some from a book signing that was done, like Avon Books, I think, did a book signing at one of our local bookstores several years ago. And that's where I went because of one author.
Yeah.
But see, usually the ones I read, they focus on the female as being on the cover. So it's
Which
still,
even some of those covers,
yes,
I'm like,
yeah.
They don't, I hate to say that they don't look like real books. Because, I mean, they're real books. The authors put their time into it.
But I think more recently with some of the romances, like before,
I was going to say, like, so, like, recently with romance in general, I've been noticing, like, more, like, pastel covers with, like, illustrations, like red, white, and royal blue, and a few others. We were just at Barnes & Noble, like, we went just specifically to see if the covers are like that, because another one's coming out really soon called Bringing Down the Duke, and that cover, I freaking love it. It's so pretty. I posted it on Instagram at Between These Pages with a dot in between each word. But yeah, and like that cover would be one that looks like it belongs with every other book, and like looks like it's a real book.
And I was telling Paige, with
it.
that, a lot of times the UK editions are like that.
Yeah.
They won't have the people on the cover or stuff like that. But I also feel like some of the more recent romances are focus on some of the hard-hitting societal issues. Like, I mean, Red, White, and Royal Blue deals with politics and the LGBTQ, like, representation. And then, like, Sarah McLean, all of her heroines are feminists, and she empowers them and those stories, which wasn't, she's a Regency writer, but she, which at the time you didn't really have feminists, but she incorporates that into it. And so I think I appreciate those more compared to like the old school Harlequin romance, with that scene on the cover. So, and I think, but I do think a lot of people think it's like a dirty little secret.
Yeah, and almost
attitude
like
to it.
Even like if somebody asks me like what I'm reading, like I'm more likely to explain like a fantasy book than I am a romance. Like with romance, I'm like, oh, it's just some romance book. Like I just kind of like brush it off.
Right.
But like, I don't know, I don't like that we do that, because I feel like there's nothing wrong with enjoying a romance book. And I don't think there's anything wrong with like wanting romance to be a subplot of the majority of what we read.
Right.
Because romance is always, like, I mean, I feel like romance is in so many people's lives anyway.
Yes.
And like Cody and I, like, no, he's not like sweeping me off my feet every night, but like if I'm crying my eyes out, he's the one that's there.
Yeah.
So like
when you get really sick, like that's who's there. Besides EXO.
Yeah, my dog's there too sometimes. He usually just walks around so that he loves to, like, if I'm laying in bed, so like my hair's all over my pillow, he will like walk around my head. And it's like if I have a migraine,
oh my gosh,
and he's walking around my head, I feel so bad every time I like yell at him when I have a migraine. I feel so bad.
It's like when Poppy, or she'll start barking, or when she would get her squeaky toy, I'm like, oh my gosh, I may actually need to find you a new home because I can't do this right now. And then I feel awful because
I know, which even last night I had a headache and I was just like, he was trying to like crawl all over me. I was like, dude, I can't deal with this right now. Like I can't.
But I will say this, I do love romance books that incorporate dogs and cats. Like,
only if there is an absolute guarantee that none of these animals will be harmed in the making of that book.
Of course, but I'm like, what romance book would do that?
No, I don't. It wasn't even a romance book. There was some book that came out a couple years ago, and I read it, but it was the one that
Marley and Me.
No,
because I won't even see anything like that.
It was like a fantasy book, and it was one that had a weird cover. It had something on like maybe the edges of the pages or something.
Yeah, see, I wouldn't have any idea.
Oh my God, that's gonna drive me crazy now if I don't figure out what this is.
I was about to say she has to look it up. But no,
but anyway, there was a dog harmed in that book, and I was like, I needed a trigger warning, which is a whole other topic, but we won't get into trigger warnings today.
But also, I feel like with the advent of like Kindle Unlimited and now the Audible Escape, you know, it's...
Oh, see, and I will not listen to a romance, like, out loud.
Really?
Yeah,
I'll do it in my car. That's why, like,
I don't even like sex scenes in movies.
Well,
like,
see, but the books I read don't have a lot of that in it. Like, it just suggests it. Well, those are those Kindle Unlimited books. But, like, you know, the Robin Carr ones I've been reading, the Virgin, well, you guys probably know by now, but I've been reading the Virgin River series because of it coming out. Netflix picked it up, so it's coming out next year, I believe, because they just started filming. But I'll listen to those in the car. And so actually I have a good friend who does the same thing, and she's the one I'll go to the beach with, and so I'm totally okay. Like, she knows. And there's a few others authors we've read or listened to in the car, and so it's totally okay. Like, I won't get embarrassed in front of her. But that's the thing, like, you know, it's with those two things, like, the only thing you really find in there are romance books. Like, they don't have Kindle Unlimited for YA or any of that. It's just primarily focused and targeted towards...
There are some, like,
but it's not...
The older, like, Girl of Fire and Thorns is on Kindle Unlimited.
Oh, I'm gonna have to get it that way then. But, I feel like it's primarily targeted towards the romance audience. Because even the new... I saw one of the Audible Escape ads, and it was all... I mean, it was 100%, you know, the romance type thing.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I feel like it is different because those books, you know, instead of costing $18 or $20 on Audible, you get it for free in that package, that monthly package. And so that value isn't necessarily there. Just like what we said with the book covers.
This was another romance cover that looks not like...
the other. It's called Prince in Disguise.
Yeah, Prince in Disguise by Stephanie Kate Strom. We read this last year. And I'm just still looking for that book I was talking about. But yeah, that one's another one that was like a romance, but it was, the cover was very not like a romance.
Right. And so, like, I feel when it comes to those, like, Kindle and Audible books, the romance ones are so much cheaper. And so those authors get a whole lot less than, say, if it's YA or fantasy or sci-fi or just regular literary fiction.
See, because I Christina Lauren.
Yeah, you did. Because, you know, it is kind of looked down on.
Yeah, for sure.
And I've seen some authors post, you know, people like, oh, are you still writing those, like, sexy books? Or are you still writing this? You know, when they go out in public and they're like, I write books, you know? And that's what I think, like, we have to put more value in. They wrote a book and they're successful, and they're hugely successful.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to Target or Walmart or Kroger's or any place like that, there's massive sections of it.
Honestly, romance authors tend to put out more than one book a year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not saying they work harder, but I'm just saying, like, they are working their butt off.
Yeah.
Like,
and I have found they're more interactive with their readers than others. That's who I saw on Facebook and Instagram first before, you know, a lot of the big, like, now most YA authors you can see there.
Yeah.
And there's a few of the literary ones, but primarily it was the romance ones interacting. And those were the ones, at least for where we live, that's who I saw more book signings and stuff for.
Yeah.
And they still go. And then they have their own, award show.
The edge of everything. It no longer has the cover that I had. But that had animal being harmed. And I didn't like it.
Yeah, like, I know romance has, like, the Rita Awards and stuff where, I mean, I don't know if there's, like, a YA awards thing or any of that. But I know romance, they have a big award show.
Which kind of is romance the country of books? Like country music, like they have their own like award, and like country music is so like heavily centered like around Nashville,
right?
Whereas it's like set apart from all the other.
Yeah, you could truly think of it like that, because I feel like YA could have been that, but then that's become so mainstream with hype and
I feel like the lines of like YA and adult have blurred. This is another thing we're gonna talk about soon.
Yeah, new adult.
But like it's blurred so much, so like it's more likely that like adults are gonna be reading it versus just teenagers.
Right.
I still feel like if we're hanging out in the YA section at the bookstore and the romance section, both of them I'm kind of like, no, I'm not here for that.
Right. I kind of run away in romance section if anyone comes along, because I'm like, I can't be seen here. It's so bad, because I'm like, they're such good books, or they have good themes, or any of that, but then it does have that shameful quality to it.
Our romance like backs up to fantasy. So, like literally, I literally just turn right around. I'm like, looking at this random fantasy book right now.
I'm like, oh look, here's this History of Magic book. Yeah, I mean, it really is. But see, and then the front, it faces the cafe, so then it's like you really have to be sneaky, because you're like, you don't want to be caught looking there.
Yeah, there's this video on YouTube. It's called Sorry Stephanie Meyer or something like that, and it talks about like Twilight. And in that book, or in that video, it talks about whoever put it up. I can't even remember who posted it now. Whoever they are, they talk about the fact that we tend to mock things that teenage girls are into, and I think it's an extension of that with romance, because it's true. Like if Game of Thrones had been a romance show, like The Tudors is heavily focused on like drama and romance, or like Reign is heavily focused on that, so we're like, oh, it's not really like historically accurate. I mean, they're not, because they are dramatizations of stuff that happened. But I mean, if somebody enjoys, say, The Tudors, and so for that reason they learn all this stuff in history, like, I mean, I still think that's a good thing. Like, because I know with The Tudors, like, if I or when I watched it or whatever, like, I would then go look up whatever happened and like see what really happened. Or like when we read Philippa Gregory. Like, I mean, technically most of those are like a very fine line between like being historical books and being romance books.
Yeah, it'd be like Outlander. And so,
and I feel like Outlander, it's not necessarily, I haven't really seen it looked down upon with most of my friends, because they like it, but like just outside perspective of other people who that's not their thing, they're like, oh, they're just having sex every 5 seconds. So.
Which is not it. I mean, when you learn all about the herbs and plant life of Scotland. But I also feel like, you know,
like I could go be a botanist in Scotland right now.
Exactly. I think but I also feel like, you know, there's a lot of people that they just read romance. Like, we read
Discovery of Witches is another one that has a heavy romance plot.
But see, I don't feel like it's as heavy as like a true romance book.
But other people disagree with you, and they're like,
they're wrong.
They're like, it's the adult Twilight.
Well, they call it adult Twilight, but I don't feel like it's a romance, because you don't have, I don't know.
There's because the romance is kind of a subplot.
Right, that's why I think I feel that way.
The end,
But like, I can see people whose like their mom or like older sister, they only read romance, or they would hide the books under their bed or something like that. And then, you know, look down upon them. But then I'm like, they don't even read a book or read one book a year. So at least the person that reads romance is actually reading.
Yeah.
And so I'm like,
and
to me, that has more value than someone.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to the whole, like, is your book like your escapism or is it? Because, I mean, like I said, I don't really have the need to reread the Scarlet Letter or the Iliad or anything like that, because I just don't care. But I will pick up a romance or a YA fantasy or a regular fantasy or whatever sounds interesting to me at the time. And I don't know, but it is like, even when we were talking about star rating systems, and we were talking about like
the difference,
is like Mistborn, can they be held to the same scale as I don't know, like the Chicagoland Vampires.
Or Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Yeah.
Like,
and they're both 5-star reads for me, but they're 5-star reads for very different reasons. And I mean, I think especially like with us kind of like writing more and stuff, I've kind of realized that like with a contemporary, those authors still have to do world building. Like they're not necessarily coming up with like a magic system, but they are like building the world around the characters.
Right.
And like,
well, and then the research they have to do behind it. Like
that's
learning more and
like
more
romance.
When it comes to romance that takes place in different time periods or different places. Like there's a lot of research that goes into that. And I mean just like some books, like I feel like that should give it as much credit as, say, a regular literary fiction book.
Yeah.
Because the research is there.
And in fact, a lot of times, like, I feel like with romance, because they put out more than one book a year, usually, they have to come up with, like, more characteristics for their characters.
Right.
Because obviously you don't want, like, the same character over and over and over.
Well, and I also feel most romance books are in a series. And so it could end up being an 8, 9, 10... 12, 15 book series, and so they have to make each book unique, but they also have to make it fluid across the whole thing where it all connects. Which
I will say honestly, because with a lot of the series there's like follows a different character, like you know, you just follow like a group of characters. I wish that more authors did like the same couple for like a trilogy. And then, all right, the battery died, so we're back. But I was just talking about like how I wish they would do like romance trilogies.
Yep.
And then you were saying something.
Oh, there's a obviously an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. I think it's called, what is it, Becoming Mrs. Darcy, I think. But it does follow, it continues the story, and so it follows Darcy and Elizabeth through it. And so that was kind of my first big introduction actually to romance, because it was right after I read Pride and Prejudice, and then it definitely, those two books fall into the romance category, so it followed those. But I do like those where it follows those same people.
Yeah, especially because like sometimes like I don't necessarily like the best friend, because usually the second one is always like about the best friend of the girl, and like there's there's one that literally did not finish the series because it was just like, I don't care to know about this person. Oh, I can't think of what it was, but I was just like, well, whatever, I'm not reading it.
Like, I think we both would automatically pre-order immediately if there was a sequel to Red, White, and Royal Blue that followed Alex and Henry. Or I would even consider following, you know, his sister, I think, or the best friend. Yeah. Just because of the world.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely liked the world building in that. And that's one actually that has quite a bit of world building, because it's kind of an alternate America.
Yes.
Which obviously not everybody looks down on romance. Obviously we don't. Right. A lot of people don't. But I don't know. I just feel like it's definitely, just in my own life, I've had more embarrassment with like reading romance than I would have like with even like YA. Because especially since it is so mainstream, like it's perfectly acceptable to be reading it or whatever. Yeah. I think it started with Twilight. I'm just kidding.
And so yeah, I wouldn't consider Twilight romance.
It is all romance.
It's YA fantasy to me.
It is 100%. Not fantasy. It is 100% not fantasy.
No, it's definitely
if anything, not it's paranormal.
Book. Yes, well, paranormal.
And it is definitely a romance book. That entire plot is driven by her romance.
I know, but I don't put it in the same category as like the romance books I would read at all. Yeah. Well, I mean, because I feel like it's YA, and so that's why it's not.
But it's a paranormal romance YA. Like, I read paranormal romance. Right. There's really nothing different from Twilight versus like a paranormal romance.
Yeah, and so
you tend to read like
more historical or contemporary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, okay, when is this guy gonna get fangs? And
whereas when is this person gonna turn into a werewolf?
Yeah. Especially werewolf. I like werewolf romance. Though lately I've been into hockey romance, which I didn't even realize it was as expansive a genre as it was.
It's sports. Yeah. There's a huge, I think it's...
I was into football romance, and then I was like running out of football romances to read.
And so then you find,
Yeah, so then I just kind of went over to hockey romance, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying this little trip.
Oh, there's something for everyone when it comes to romance. And I think that's also what makes it so accessible, because it's a genre that really you can find something for anyone.
Now, I will say, and I will say that, like, you don't necessarily have to be as educated to read romance.
Correct.
But that's not to say that romance doesn't have themes in it that you know, like...
Right.
I don't know, I'm just thinking of, like, YA also a lot of times has
I was about to say YA would be it.
Fantasy, like it's, or like fantasy or like literary fiction, sometimes it's so dense of like a theme that it is like you're actually like working out your brain to read it.
Like where you have to go back and reread it multiple times, or like sometimes, like when it came to Game of Thrones, I would have to like, or if I finish Game of Thrones, I'll have to take notes, like to make sure I keep everything straight.
I literally will never read the books, because literally even when we're watching the show, I'm looking at Cody and I'm like, which old white guy is this? Because I don't recognize him. And he's like, that's so-and-so. I'm like, okay, well, what was he doing in last episode? Because I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like kind of when it comes to romance and stuff, like fantasy, that was typically, I mean, if you... at the history, that was mainly just for guys. Like how, even to this day, how it's marketed. It's mainly for males.
Which goes back to the whole like mocking what women like.
Yep.
And like looking down on it because, you know. Which, I mean, that's kind of a thing. Like, I mean, it's, I think it's somewhat true to a certain extent.
Right. Well, and even how we mentioned, I think in the last one, how male writers write females, their female characters in fantasies, like how they're being used in that.
Oh my god, I saw this thing. I sent it to Cody yesterday. It was so funny because like literally that's pretty much what I do with my husband, is send him memes. But it's this tweet and it says, if men are stronger than women, why do male characters in video games need full plate armor while the women only need a chainmail bikini? Checkmate.
Gosh.
And I was like, oh my god.
But it's so true because
though.
if you read fantasy and sci-fi,
or even like think about Marvel movies and like the difference between like the females, like what they wear versus the males. I don't know. It's just, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that women are as oppressed as we used to be in
literature,
well, in the world,
life,
in life, but like, I don't know, some things you kind of just kind of wonder like how much of like upbringing and things like that in your media will affect like your thoughts and things like that. I think it's just interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
But ultimately, I think that romance is a genre and it's a valid genre, and if you want to read romance, you should read romance, like, and you know, not be embarrassed about it.
I'm like, you do you. Like, that's the thing. And just,
and I will say, like, we went to Barnes and Noble yesterday and to like look at the romances and see the covers and things, and they are like totally moving into like even having them the same size, because you know for so long it was like you could only get mass market paperback, and for whatever reason mass market paperback is not necessarily thought of. I don't know, like I never would like want like a mass market cover, you know? Even though like Game of Thrones comes in mass market, but like,
which I think is ridiculous because it's such a big book. I'm like, no. Crazy. But yeah, like I feel like it's moving, because the only ones I feel like before, Nora Roberts would have regular size books and hardback books, and now we are seeing that switch. Like I saw some of the authors like Susan Mallory and I think it was Deborah Harkness, like they had those bigger, like regular
like books. The regular size books with like usually like an illustrated cover, versus having a man plastered with abs on the front, because like obviously I would feel less embarrassed like reading a newer like cover, like the pastel animated covers, than I would like a guy with abs.
Right, just like The Wedding Date, that was big last year. But that's a regular one, and it had an illustrated cover, and I picked it up and I read it wherever I wanted to. And there's a few others. Like I feel like The Hating Game, which I ended up not liking. But
and then like with some of them, I can't remember like a specific example, but like with some of them when we were looking through romance, I was like, I didn't even realize that was romance because it doesn't look like a romance.
Right, like I didn't even realize Red, White, and Royal Blue was a romance until we went to Barnes & Noble, and she was like, oh yeah, it definitely is. I thought it was just a new adult. Like I expected it to be in YA because people actually, and we talked about hype last week, but people didn't hype it as this huge romance. I was thinking more it was a contemporary.
Yeah, well, and I would imagine because of like the booktubers that you saw hyping it, because a lot of them are like primarily like YA booktubers.
Right.
So if they're hyping something, obviously, naturally, it has to be YA.
Right, like there was one other person who reads YA. It's Chelsea Darling Reads, but she reads a lot of romance. Like I think she hosts this Smutathon. Like I think she's one of those. But I
know I keep meaning meaning to actually like do that readathon, but I never get it. I never
and I never like I can only read so many like romance books in a row. I get burned out.
Yeah. In April, I did like 3 readathons, I think. I think it was like 3 weekly readathons, and I was like, I can't do this again for a long time, so.
But yeah, so like I didn't expect it until I read, it was actually yesterday, I think. Well, I don't know, we were at Panera, and I told her what part of the book I was in, and she's like, oh, well, go have fun reading that scene in public. And I was like, okay, like, here we go, guys. But it wasn't bad, I don't feel like.
No, it wasn't bad.
And see, that's how I like, if I read a romance book, I like that more subtle.
I said that because I think it's hilarious. Like, it always happens with me, too. Somehow, I'm always reading the sex scene in public. Like, I'm like, how does this happen? Yeah. Another thing, I think I mentioned it in one of my Reading Rush vlogs when I read Red, White, and Royal Blue. The cover of it is actually very similar to American Royals.
Yes.
And American Royals, I would say, is new adult.
I agree.
Because it takes place...
If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the different covers, because I have them both right up. But yeah, they look identical. And yeah, for those that are listening...
They look very similar to each other. Yes. Like, just the style of them.
Right. Which I love.
And I would say both of those, like, the characters are new adult. Yep. Like, they're young adult according to demographics. Like I said, we'll get
we're going to talk about later.
We'll talk about that later.
But yeah, I could see them on the same shelf and being sold together. Like in a bookstore. Like, I mean, I never would have thought this is like romance and then this is
and even
like a regular YA or new adult
there's
book.
Some romance in there, trust me.
Well, I'm not there yet, so.
But yeah, like they just look very similar, and the characters are very similar ages, so like I can see those being sold right next to each other, whereas like Thousandth Floor by Katharine McGee was high schoolers, right? They were like high school age.
They were high school.
So yeah, I would say American Royals is new adult too, but I mean, I don't know where, I think I said in my video, I don't know where it's supposed to be shelved. I don't really care. I like the book.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I
don't know, I just think it's interesting to think about, like, the things we read and the weight we give each one.
Right, and how we judge the different genres, because we each come to it differently.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean... Because I know even in our book club, some people are like, oh, I don't do YA. And I'm like, well, you'll be surprised, because I totally was surprised reading some of the new YAs. Like, it's really well developed.
Yeah, I think that YA, I think a lot of people grew up when we grew up, and so there wasn't a lot of YA. Like, there wasn't a lot of books that, like,
fit that category.
Had me, you know, like had a character like me in it. And so I think we are all grown up now, and we're all writing books, and we're all like, okay, well, we're just gonna write YA because we love it, and like, you know, whatever.
Right. And I'm like,
well, and honestly, like, as an almost 30-year-old woman, like, I was reading a book, like the back of a book yesterday, and it was like a 28-year-old who's like divorcing her husband and doing, and I'm like, I don't want to read that. Like, that doesn't sound fun.
Like, that's kind of depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure she'll find romance in that.
Oh, of course.
You know, I don't know what it is, but like a lot of time I don't gravitate toward characters that are my age. And a lot of them I noticed that I would pick up the book. I wish I could remember this title, but it talked about like kids and stuff, and like I don't have kids, and it's almost a turn off for me. Like, as soon as kids are mentioned, I'm like, I don't really want to read.
I don't think I typically,
and I don't know why that is. I don't dislike kids, but
yeah, I don't think I typically read ones with kids. And clearly I don't dislike them since
And she doesn't have kids either.
No.
But yeah, I don't dislike them. It's just maybe
I don't want to read about them.
Yeah, maybe because I don't have kids, so I don't gravitate toward those stories. Whereas, like, I know, like, moms, like, they gravitate toward, like, women who are kind of, like, doing it all. You know, like, that perception of, like, doing it all.
Right. Like the super mom type of thing. Or they gravitate towards, like, Big Little Lies, where, you know, they can see it's okay to have faults.
Yeah.
You know, we can't do it all.
Yeah.
And I feel like even with romance now, with Hallmark, like, now I think romance has become more acceptable in some ways.
I think because the women are louder. We're louder about watching those movies. Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly we've seen, like, Hallmark now has a new movie, I think, every weekend. And they, I think, come out with, like, 50 new Christmas ones a year. Like, it's, I think, a bigger thing. And so significant others end up watching it with them because, you know what? If you want to watch a Hallmark movie, you're going to watch that Hallmark movie. And so it becomes more, I think it's easier, I don't know, more acceptable. But like in my mind, it's like, you know, a book's a book. So it should be, I'm like, whatever with it. But I think because of Hallmark, it's...
Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah. So, I don't know. So
it's interesting to think about. We would love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, because we know it's a interesting topic.
Yeah. Yeah, go over to our Instagram and comment because that's where we remember to check because we're awful about checking everything else. And don't forget, we are buddy reading Ace of Shades by Amanda Foody this month, which is kind of like a YA fantasy, so, but there is a romance involved. And yeah, we're going to be doing an episode at the end of this month where we talk all about that book and all of that, so we would love to have you join us, so go read that book. And don't forget to leave us a review if you have a minute because we really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.